So, like he said, my name's John Egan. I'm an engineering manager at Pinterest for our emails and notifications team. I've been on the team for 3 years now, and when I first started, we had just like 2 email types, and emails and notifications weren't really considered a big growth driver for Pinterest. And today where the team is at is we have over 24 different types of emails and notifications that drive millions of users back to the product each and every single day. So today I'm here to share with you a little bit about our strategy we've executed on over the past 3 years to transform emails and notifications into a major growth driver for Pinterest. But first, I wanted to set a little bit of context. Sure, probably everyone's heard of Pinterest, but some people sometimes have some misconceptions about it. So what Pinterest is, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, is it's a site where people go to get inspiration and get ideas. So it might be finding ideas for a recipe you want to cook for dinner that night. It might be getting ideas for where you want to travel on your next vacation, or maybe just some ideas for how you want to liven up your backyard. Pinterest is about the future, it's about discovering ideas, and it's about you and your personal tastes. We now have over 150 million monthly active users that use the product each month. Over 80% of our activities on mobile, and over half our users are now outside of the US. And today, I'm going to talk not just about push notifications, but also a lot about email as well. And I know everyone here is thinking about mobile apps, but email, I think, is one of the most underappreciated mobile re-engagement channels. For Pinterest, we see over half our emails are opened on mobile clients, and email drives a substantial amount of mobile sessions for us. So I wanted to touch on 2 guiding principles that have been really helpful for us before I get into the strategy. So one of the first guiding principles has been about what do you send users. I think sometimes people can get a little bit overwhelmed because emails and notifications seem like this blank canvas where they can do almost anything, and it doesn't have to be tied down by the product's existing UI. But for us, the way we approach notifications is we don't think about our business goal of we just want to bring users back to the product, but we think about how can we use notifications and emails as a way to extend the product's core value to the user. And this framing has been really helpful for us in figuring out whether the emails and notifications we have make sense and whether they're helping further users getting the product's core value. The other principle for us is that we treat the notifications we send as being able to be sent on any channel. So there's a few things that make push different from email, primarily that it's really timely and that it's location-based. But at least for Pinterest, none of those factors really are a factor for us. So every single thing we send out can be sent out as either an email or a notification. And so here you can see the identical content both as it appears on the right as an email where we're sending you ideas for some pins about Bali. And then we also, on the left, send push notifications where the content appears in the product's in-app notification pane. Now, our strategy that we've executed on the past 3 years is, at a high level, is pretty simple. There's 3 big buckets. There's coverage, conversion, and quality. And I'll speak a little bit about each one of these, a little bit about what we've learned over the past 3 years for each of these, and some examples of what we've done. So the first is coverage, and on the surface, it's pretty simple. Find something that you can send to everyone. And when we were first starting out on emails and notifications, we tended to focus a little bit too much on using it just as a channel to re-engage less engaged users. So at Pinterest, we classify users into different levels of engagement, and the notifications team used to focus primarily on new, dormant, and resurrected users, and not give a lot of thought to how emails could help our existing active users. But what we learned over time was that emails and notifications work as an engagement amplifier for users no matter where they are in your engagement funnel. So if you have dormant users, they can bring them back and make them marginal. If you have core users, they can bring them back and make them daily active users. And so what we learned was that you have to have the right set of emails for users at all these different varying levels of engagement. And for us, as we started to think about how could we create a portfolio, the right set of emails and notifications for all these different users, we started thinking of our emails and notifications along 2 dimensions. The first was related to the product value. Basically, what kind of ideas could we send to the users? It could be pins, it could be boards, a few other different things. And the second was, how engaging was the content that we could send you based on your current level of engagement? So it could be really personalized recommendations or things similar to what you've been engaging with if you're an active user. If you're less active, we had to rely more on just popular or trending content. And when you start to look at all the different combinations you have here, you end up with quite a few different types of emails and notifications. We have over 20 different emails and notification types that we send out. And with all these different types of notifications and all these different users that are varying levels of engagement, our mission then becomes to figure out what to send to users. And so here is a few examples of some of the different emails and notifications we have. On the left, we have some pins similar to what you've been engaging with recently for your board plating. We have trending search topics for this week, trending pins in home decor, and board recommendations in interior design. And so with all these different types, our mission becomes to figure out what is the right message to send to the user to re-engage them, figure out the right channel to re-engage them on, and then re-engage them at the right time. And the way we used to do this was we used to have a set of business rules. So for figuring out the right message, we did that by just whatever message had the highest overall click-through rate that we could send, that's what we would send to the user. For figuring out how frequently to send it to them, we would send you the same type of email at most once every 7 days. And then finally, for figuring out when to re-engage you, we just figured out what hour had the best overall open rate for your country, and that's when we would send you the email or notification. But over the past year or year and a half or so, we've had a lot of success by replacing each of these business rules with personalized machine learning models. So instead of sending you whichever email has the highest overall click-through rate, we built models that predicted what your personal engagement rate is going to be for that email or that notification. And then we sent you whichever one had the highest predicted engagement rate. We then use those predicted engagement rates to figure out how frequently to send emails or notifications to you. So if you were more likely to engage, send you the ones you were likely to engage with more frequently. And then finally, for figuring out what time to send to you, we built out models that predicted what hour were you most likely to engage with. And so a quick example of one of the experiments we've done here is sending users more of the emails and push notifications they like. And so what we did was we built out the models to figure out what their engagement probability was. And then if they're more likely to engage, we would send you those emails more often. And what we saw was that it increased email volume by about 20%. But what we saw in the results was it actually increased the overall click volume on emails by over 70% and increased the click-through rate by over 40%. And ultimately, this experiment helped add millions of weekly active users to the product. So we thought, that worked pretty well. What if we try the opposite? What if we try sending you fewer of the notifications that you don't like? And so we tried here a few different thresholds, as you can see. And what we found was that we were able to cut out over 34% of our email volume for less than a 1% drop in clicks, and it increased our click-through rate by over 50%. And that helps a lot with stuff like deliverability, since for Gmail or Yahoo or other email providers, your emails look more engaging because you're now more efficient about who you send to. And with this experiment, even though we're cutting out such a huge amount of volume, we saw no drop in any of our core metrics. So the next big part of our strategy is conversion. And with emails and notifications, there's a natural conversion funnel from sending things to users opening it, clicking it, viewing it, and ultimately engaging in product. And so with this, we work all up and down the funnel on trying to improve conversion. But one of the areas that we've had the most success is, unsurprisingly, at the top of the funnel with open rate. And what we've done there is a lot of copy testing. And I think for anyone who's working on growth, copy testing isn't some new concept. It's nothing groundbreaking. But one of the things we learned was how much effort you really need to put into it to get the maximum gains. And so one of the areas we first started off with was trying to improve how we did copy testing as we became a more international and global country. So before, what we used to do was we'd run an experiment, try 10 different variants, see what performed best globally, and we would ship that to 100% of users across the globe. But we invested in building a framework that allowed us to run these copy tests in a language-independent way. The way it worked was you'd set up a copy test, put in, say, 10, 15 different variants. It would translate those variants to 30 different languages that we supported, and then run the copy test as an independent experiment in each of those languages. And then it would automatically evaluate the results and ship whatever performed best in that language. So here in this example, you might not be able to make it out, but variant 3 is what's performing best in English, variant 6 is what performed best in French, and variant 2 is what performed best in German. And so by building out this framework, it allowed us to figure out what was performing best in each country. And after building it out, we thought, great, we have this framework for copy testing. Let's try it out on our highest volume email. And at the time, the highest volume email had this pretty crappy subject line that just said recommended pins. And that's the same subject line that you get week after week, month after month. And going into this test, we thought, we'd just try out 10, 15 different variants, see what performed best, ship it, and call it a day. And so we did that. In our first iteration, worked with the writing team, did a lot of brainstorming, tried out over 15 different variants. And the results we saw in English was a 1% lift in open rate. So naturally, being on the growth team, we were pretty disappointed by these results. We had been hoping for something a little bit better, especially given the fact that the current control subject line was, in our opinion, so crappy. And so we went back to the drawing board to figure out how we could really push these results further. And one of the engineers on my team ended up coming up with our strategy. And what he did is he looked at every single word and every single punctuation point, punctuation mark in that sentence from the first iteration, and then tried out all possible synonyms for those words. So he tried out hey first name versus hi first name, found some pins versus picked some pins, tested using an exclamation point versus a comma. And you can see at the bottom how we ran those tests would be just two identical variants where the only difference was that one word or that one punctuation mark. And so from running this test, we started to hone in on what performed best, which words performed better, which ways of describing pins performed better. For us, we had these concepts of pin keywords or topic display names. And in our third iteration, we took some of the most promising combinations. We launched an experiment with them, and the results were that an increase from that 1% increase in the initial first iteration to an 11% increase in open rate in the third iteration on an email that went out to over 150 million people a week. So here you can see the winner from the third iteration isn't all that different from the winner from the first iteration. But that sort of micro testing and figuring out on a word by word and punctuation by punctuation level what worked best is what really made the difference between a really mediocre gain and a phenomenal gain. And in some cases, we were able to get even bigger increases. And what we found was that certain variables tended to usually work across email types, and certain variables tended not to work. And so as we started to learn what worked for us and what didn't, that helped speed things up since we didn't have to go through the full 3 iteration cycle to get those gains. Now, the last big part of our strategy has been around quality. And the reason quality is important is because quality is the bridge between users clicking on an email or opening a push notification and them actually having an engaged in-product session. And one of the biggest things we've done to improve quality over the past year has been to move away from marketing-driven emails and notifications. So at the beginning of this year, we had this email type called the editorial email that went out to lots of users. And the way it worked was each week, the marketing team would put together this email around a certain theme in 10 really broad, high-level categories. And they do this for 6 different countries. So each week, they're putting together 60 different emails. And what we saw when we looked at the stats was that these emails had good open rates, okay click rates, but when you looked at the conversion rate from clicking on the email to actual in-product engagement, it was far lower than a lot of our other email types. And so here's a couple examples. If you engaged at all on Pinterest in food and drink, you'd get this email about home cooking. If you were a guy who had engaged in fashion, you get an email about outerwear. If you were a guy who had engaged in home decor or DIY, you get this email about caveman hacks. And so we decided to take this concept of having an email around a certain category, but build out an algorithmic version. And our reason for doing that was that we believed that having one person pick 6 pins and having those be the right set of 6 pins to send out to 10 million people probably wasn't true, and that having algorithms pick the pins for you would probably be much more effective. So we created a new email that we called Category Recommended Pins that drew upon a database of over 10,000 different categories. And so if you were on Pinterest for recipes, you would get these recipes in paleo diets. If you were using Pinterest to find shoes, you get recommendations about shoes. And then finally, if you weren't a caveman, but you were using Pinterest to find affordable decor for your apartment, you might get this email about new ideas for you in IKEA. And overall, this email supplanted the editorial email. But after we launched it, our machine learning model started to pick up that this email was more engaging and started giving it more distribution, more volume, until it became our highest volume email. So that's all I had for today. And I have time for some questions now.
Hey, how's it going, John? Thanks for the great talk. Seems like you guys are doing some really cool stuff on the programmatic machine learning side. Mm-hmm. I noticed your title was Growth Engineering Manager. Mm-hmm. Are you an engineer or a marketer, or like how does that work within Pinterest?
So I'm an engineer, and at least at Pinterest, each team has an engineering manager, a product manager, and a design lead. But I think, especially at the leadership level, engineering managers have a lot of thought about product. Product sometimes has thoughts about engineering, and so everyone can have ideas to contribute.
Hey, John, thanks. This is great. 2-part question. The first is all of the automation of the email and notification system proprietary, or do you guys use third partners for emails and notifications? Second, did you look at the unsubscribe metrics as well as you're doing experience testing?
Yeah, so at least for Pinterest, we use mostly in-house stuff, except for delivering the emails. We use a company called SparkPost. Part of the reason for that is at our volume, there's a lot of companies can't really handle the scale that we need. And then what was the second part of that question? Oh yeah, unsubscribes, right? Yeah, so for the one where we increased volume, we didn't really see much increase in unsubscribe rate. It was just like a single % or two, even though we increased volume by 20%. And part of that was we're sending it to the users that were engaging with it. What did help unsubscribe a lot was decreasing and sending you fewer of the emails that you didn't like helped decrease unsubscribe rate pretty substantially.
Hey, so you said that you send out emails and push kind of across all channels the same emails, the same push. How does Pinterest think about mobile web versus kind of the native mobile app? Is it kind of the same product development prioritization, or?
So far we've heavily biased towards the mobile app because we see better engagement in the mobile app. And so if we can get you into the mobile app, you're going to be much more engaged than if you went to a mobile web session. As we are starting to focus more and more on international growth, especially in some emerging markets, that's changing the equation a little bit, and we're starting to work on improving our mobile web experience, primarily for those emerging markets. So the question is, what is the difference in open rate on emails versus push? So we generally see higher open rates on push notifications. One of the difficulties is on iOS, measuring open rate is pretty difficult because at least the way most people engage with it outside of Silicon Valley is that they just unlock their phone and click on your app icon, which isn't like a direct open. We've done experiments where we hold out push notifications to like a very, very small percentage of users to kind of see what the difference is, and use A/B testing to measure like what the true impact of push is. And we've seen usually that it's about a factor, what we call the indirect open rate is a factor of 10x higher than the directly measured push open rate. And so in terms of like indirect opens, push is generally more engaging than email.